The Where Our Minds Wander podcast may contain sensitive content and explicit language. Listener discretion is advised.
Greetings, fellow wanderers, to the places our minds wander.
Where strange lights speed beyond reason across a clear night sky.
The house at the end of the road where disembodied voices whisper and strange noises make the living shiver.
Lurking shadows hiding on the edge of the woods just outside your back door.
Odd, true events throughout time that lead you down the rabbit hole. I'm Wes.
And I'm Beth.
And this is Where Our Minds Wander. Hello and welcome back, all you fellow wanderers. And happy belated Father's Day to all you dads and stepdads out there.
Yes. And you had a pretty good Father's Day, I would say.
Yeah, I sure did. My daughter Lindsay got me a big bottle of Kraken rum, which is my favorite. And you know, it was only a couple months ago she turned 21, and Kraken and Coke was our first drink together.
It was very father-daughterly.
Yes, it was. So after we finish this recording, I'm going to go have a nice big drink of rum and Coke because the school year is over and we officially start our summer vacation.
Yay, vacation!
Woohoo!
But I'm assuming you aren't going to tell us a terrifying tale about rum.
Nope, that I'm not.
So
let me ask you this. Think your job sucks?
Sometimes.
Well, I'm sure we all feel that way from time to time, but perhaps this will make you feel a little bit better about your job after.
Okay.
Yeah, so here we go. An exciting public health opportunity has arisen in the City of London. Due to a recent vacancy, the infectious diseases team are looking for a full or part-time plague doctor. Applicants must be qualified physicians and preferably members of the College of Physicians. Apothecaries need not apply. Working with a team of seekers and watchers, the job holder will admit patients to pest houses and attend patients in their own homes. They will be expected to record disease statistics for the bills of mortality, examine patients safely at a distance, perform post-mortems on an occasional basis, follow infection control plague orders, take details of wills and testaments, and give lifestyle advice for the afterlife.
Oh boy.
Mm-hmm. The role includes the requirement to maintain strict quarantine regulations and not to attend public gatherings. Physicians must carry a white stick to indicate their professional status to the public. The corporation may pay some expenses, including disinfectant fumigants, lozenges, and a small allowance for a supply of sack, which is fortified sweet wine, for medicinal and preventative purposes only.
So the corporation might supply lozenges. But if not, the doctor was responsible to just like supply his own.
It seems that way.
Carry him around in his pockets like grandma pocket candy.
Exactly. Picking the lint off them. But I love how it says for medicinal and preventative purposes only. So I guess they didn't want them to partake of it on their off time.
Right.
So applicants must be fully fit and possess a valid certificate of health. Witness and vouchsafed evidence of survival of a previous attack of the deadly pestilence is a distinct advantage and will be looked upon very favorably. Applicants must understand that the role involves long periods of social exclusion and solitude. The city cannot accept responsibility for the illness or death of a successful applicant, as it is generally public knowledge that death rates are currently running at between 15 and 60% in some areas. And treatment and prevention have not yet been discovered.
Wow, sign me up for that job.
I know. For further information and advice on this challenging but well-recompensated career opportunity, please contact experienced and well-respected senior plague doctor physicians, Dr. Nathaniel Hodges or Dr. Thomas Witherley. And the closing date on that is December 31st, 1665. So that's right, we're talking about the Black Death and the plague doctors tonight. So even before the death ships pulled into port at Messina, Many Europeans had heard rumors about a great pestilence that was carving a deadly path across the trade routes of Near and Far East. Indeed, in the early 1340s, the disease had struck China, India, Persia, Syria, and Egypt. The plague is thought to have originated in Asia over 2,000 years ago and was likely spread by trading ships, though recent research has indicated the Black Death may have existed in Europe as early as 3000 BC.
Huh.
Interesting.
Yeah, I had no idea.
Me neither. Europeans were not equipped for the horrifying reality of the Black Death, and men and women alike, the Italian poet Giovanni Boccaccio wrote, at the beginning of the malady, certain swellings, either on the groin or under the armpits, wax to the bigness of a common apple, others to the size of an egg. Some more and some less, these the vulgar named plague boils.
Ugh.
Blood and pus seeped out of these strange swellings, which were followed by a host of other unpleasant symptoms. Fevers, chills, vomiting, diarrhea, terrible aches and pains, and then death. The bubonic plague attacks the lymphatic system, causing swelling in the lymph nodes, and if left untreated, the infection can spread to the blood or lungs.
Sounds terrifying.
That it is. The Black Death was terrifyingly, indiscriminately contagious. The mere touching of the clothes, wrote Boccaccio, appeared to itself communicate the malady to the toucher. The disease was also terrifyingly efficient. People who were perfectly healthy when they went to bed at night could be dead by morning.
Jeez.
We know now that the Black Plague travels from person to person through the air as well as through the bite of infected fleas and rats. Both of these pests could be found almost everywhere in medieval Europe, but they were particularly at home aboard ships of all kinds, which is how the deadly plague made its way through European port cities.
Right, because they were just jumping from ship to ship.
They were going from ship to ship as these ships made their way to all the cities.
Yeah.
Not long after it struck Messina, the Black Death was spread to the port of Marseilles in France and the port of Tunis in North Africa. Then it reached Rome and Florence, two cities at the center of an elaborate web of trade routes. By the middle of 1348, the Black Death had struck Paris, Bordeaux, Lyon, and London. Then, however, no one had any idea how the disease was spreading or how to treat it. According to one doctor, for example, instantaneous death occurs when the aerial spirit escaping from the eyes of the sick man strikes the healthy person standing near and looking at the stick.
Wow. That's like really giving someone the stink eye.
What did they have to go on back then? They're grasping at straws.
Yeah.
Understandably, doctors did what they could do, relying on the methods known to them. Bloodletting and boil balancing were the first defense, as well as superstitious practices like burning aromatic herbs and bathing in rosewater or vinegar. Frogs were also placed on the bobos.
On the bobos. Like when you were little and you skinned your knee.
Yeah.
And your mom said, "You want me to kiss your bobo?"
Exactly. But the frogs were also placed on the bobos to rebalance the humors.
Isn't it bubos?
Bubos. So, but I always, every time I see the bubos, I'm thinking bubos.
Right.
It's just a childhood thing. So buboes are a symptom of the bubonic plague and occur as painful swellings in the thighs, neck, groin, or armpits. They are caused by Yersinia pestis, bacteria spreading from flea bites through the bloodstream to the lymph nodes, where the bacteria replicate, causing the nodes to swell.
And you'd also mentioned the four humors, that they thought it had something to do with the humors.
Right. Well, the four humors, Greek physician Hippocrates, in 1460 between 370 BCE, is often credited with developing the theory of the four humors, which is blood, yellow bile, black bile, phlegm, and their influence on the body and its emotions.
Ah, okay.
As these cures didn't work, doctors began to refuse to see patients. Priests refused to administer last rites, and shopkeepers closed their doors. Many people fled the cities for the countryside, but even there they could not escape the disease. It affected cows, sheep, goats, pigs, and chickens too. In fact, so many sheep died that one of the consequences of the Black Death was a European wool shortage, and many people desperate to save themselves even abandoned their sick and dying loved ones. Thus doing, Boccaccio wrote, each thought to secure immunity for himself.
Right. Of course.
Many believe that the Black Death was a divine punishment for sins against God, such as greed, blasphemy, heresy, fornication, and worldliness. By this logic, the only way to overcome the Black Plague was to win God's forgiveness. Some people believe that the way to do this was to purge their communities of heretics and troublemakers. So, for example, many thousands of Jews were massacred in 1348 and 1349.
Of course. Blame it on a whole group of people that have nothing to do with
Those
anything.
poor Jews.
Yeah.
When that didn't work, some upperclassmen joined processions of flagellants that traveled from town to town and engaged in public displays of penitence and punishment. They would beat themselves and one another with heavy leather straps studded with sharp pieces of metal while the townspeople looked on. For 33 and a half days, the flagellants repeated this ritual 3 times a day. Then they would move on to the next town and begin the process over again. This upset the Pope, since the townspeople turned towards these groups more than they listened to him. So he had them disbanded.
Well, that's a good thing, I guess.
Yeah, put an end to that.
No more flagellants.
Nope. Cities all over Europe hired who they thought they could help combat the disease. To a point, most of these doctors were either second-rate physicians, young physicians with limited experience, or men who had no certified medical training at all. What mattered was the plague doctor's willingness to venture into plague-stricken areas and tally the number of dead. Most of the doctor's principal roles weren't to treat the sick, but to perform autopsies and compile records of death. They also helped write wills and counsel the sick on their moral conduct. The city of Orvieto hired Matteo Fu Angelo in 1348 for 4 times the normal rate of a doctor, of 50 florin per year. Out of the 18 doctors in Venice in that year, only 1 was left by 1348. 5 had died of the plague, and 12 were missing and may have fled away. Sometimes they fled with their patients, final will and testament, as well as all their money. It wasn't uncommon for plague doctors to be kidnapped and held for ransom either.
Huh. I did not know that.
Yeah, it certainly makes you feel better about your job.
In many ways.
By the 17th century, doctors blamed the plague on Messiah, the idea that the disease was spread through foul-smelling air, and the plague doctors, as well known to them, with their bird-like mask and long robes, were born. The first mention of the infamous plague doctor costume came into play in Paris during the outbreak of 1619. Charles de l'Orme, the chief physician to Louis X111, wrote,
13th?
That's the one. The nose is 1/2 foot long, shaped like a beak, filled with perfume. Under the coat, we wear boots made in Moroccan leather, goat leather, and a short-sleeved blouse in smooth skin. The hat and gloves are also made of the same skin, with spectacles that cover the eyes. Because they believed that smelly vapors could catch in fibers of their clothing and transmit disease, Del Illinois designed a uniform of a waxed leather coat, leggings, boots, and gloves intended to deflect miasmas from head to toe. The suit was then coated in suet, hard white animal fat, to repel bodily fluids. The plague doctor also donned a prominent black hat to indicate that they were, in fact, a doctor.
Can you imagine if they're covered in suet, right? What sort of animals might be attracted to that?
You know, I could just see this as the opening in a movie. So you see the plague doctor coming down the cobblestone pathway. It's kind of dark, you know, maybe even light rain. And you see this black mass of crows coming behind him.
A whole murder of crows.
Murder of crows. Just after that suet.
Yep.
But that's just my imagination. The doctor carried a long wooden stick, which he used to communicate with his patients. examine them, and occasionally ward off the more desperate and aggressive ones. Those patients who still believe the plague to be a divine punishment requested the plague doctor whip them in repentance.
So that whole flagellant idea, right? Wow.
Beating them off with a stick.
Well, that too, but I wasn't thinking about it that way.
Foul-smelling air was also combated with sweet herbs and spices like camphor, mint, cloves, and myrrh, stuffed into the curved bird's beak like of the mask. Sometimes the herbs were set aflame before they were put in so the smoke could offer more protection.
So they'd wear it while it was smoking?
Yes.
Wow.
They'd set aflame. They'd have all the smoke. I don't understand, because I can burn sage around the house or incense and let me come in close contact with it, and my eyes are watering and I can taste it. I don't understand how it didn't burn out their smell.
In their throats.
It must have.
Yeah.
Though Delormeau was lucky enough to live an impressive 96 years old, most plague doctors had a very short lifespan, even with the suit. And those who did not get sick often lived in constant quarantine. Indeed, it could be a lonely and thankless existence for the plague doctors of yore. Understanding of the disease hadn't really advanced much over 3,000 years.
Wow, that's a long time.
That was a typo. Understanding of the disease hadn't really advanced much over these 300 years, and treatments in the 1600s weren't much better. Bloodletting and lancing was still used, but some new horrors were added, like slathering human excrement all over the babos. They also poured mercury over the victim and put them in ovens.
At the same time?
At the same time.
Can you imagine being covered in mercury and then heated up? That had to kill them.
By that time, you were probably praying for the oven.
Oh my gosh.
Surprisingly, Nostradamus spoke out against bloodletting. He also just suggested that the infected corpses could be removed immediately from the cities. He advised people to get fresh air, drink clean water, and to drink juice made of rose hips.
Nostradamus was a smart man.
That he was. Isolating new arrived sailors was also a huge step in containing the disease. Originally set at 30 days, it was increased to 40, and that's so-called quarantining.
Aha!
The plague hasn't really ever gone away. According to the World Health Organization, there are still 1,000 to 3,000 cases each year to this day.
Wow.
So my sources will be in the show notes. You can check them out there if you want to know anything about the story. Hey, did you know? Religious sites carry 3 times more malware threats than pornography sites. The average number of security threats on religious sites is around 115, compared to adult content sites, which carry around 25. In fact, only 2.4% of adult sites are infected with malware. Researchers suggest that's because porn sites need to generate a profit, most often from repeat business, so they work harder to keep their sites virus-free. Who'd have thunk it? So, Beth, what are you going to talk about tonight?
Well, I thought I would start off with an experience that I had and then go from there. So in order to talk about my experience, we have to go back in time to the summer of 1990 when I was a wee babe of 15. And my then boyfriend and his father and I had gone to the Dutchess County Fair in Rhinebeck, New York.
Well, that sounds like fun.
It was. We spent most of the day doing like typical fair things, like eating lots of greasy food and petting a lot of cows and bouncing darts off of balloons that won't pop.
You know, I don't really care for the fair all that much these days, but I do love the smoked sausage with the grilled peppers and onions. And really, that's the only thing that brings me to the fair these days.
Yeah. And sometimes you leave the fair without one, and then we still hear about it a year later.
Yes, we do. just remember that this year when we go to the fair.
I won't forget. for you to get your sandwich this year. So anyway, back to 1990 and this summer day. And we'd spent the whole day at the fair, and it was dark at this point. It was probably around 10 or 11 o'clock at night, as far as I can remember. And everyone was all trying to leave at the same time. And it was super crowded. And I was worried about being separated from my boyfriend and his father. So,
right, as the stampede, of the crowd leaving.
Yes.
You want to get the heck out of there quick.
Yes. So we all connected hands. We were all holding hands, and his dad was in the lead, and I was at the back. And we were just kind of, chained together and weaving our way through all of the people. And so I'm weaving through all of these people, and for some reason, I happened to look up. And over our heads, there was this thing, and it made absolutely no sound, but it was massive. And I remember thinking it had to be the size of a football field. And the only way I could make out its weird shape was because it was darker than the rest of the sky.
You didn't see anybody else looking up at this time, or were you just like looking ahead?
At that point, no.
Trying to just get the heck out.
At that point, it caught my eye, and I was still being pulled along, and I was trying to keep up, but I kept looking back over my shoulder at the same time. So this football-sized thing had pale yellow lights along its edges in like a V shape, but it was crooked because there were 3 lights on one side and 4 on the other. So it was more like a check mark. And I remember having the thought that one of the lights must have been burnt out.
So it looked like a boomerang with a broken tip.
Yeah. Yeah. And I also remember thinking at the time, something that huge should be making some sort of sound. Like, I don't care how noisy the midway might have been. We should have still heard something.
Yeah.
As this thing was passing over us. So I'm still being pulled along, and I'm looking up as much as I can, taking my eyes off of this thing for seconds at a time. And we got to the edge of the midway where the rope was that separated the midway from the parking area. And my boyfriend went over first, and he turned around to help me over the rope. And I was 100% sure he looked up and he saw the thing that was in the sky. But when he looked back down, I felt like I couldn't make eye contact. I just wouldn't even look at him. And we went to the car, we got in, we drove 45 minutes home in complete silence.
That's odd.
None of us said anything. We didn't say, the food was good, or what are you guys up to tomorrow? Or did you see that big freaking thing in the sky?
Right.
We said nothing the whole ride home. And my boyfriend and I never talked about it. We didn't talk about it that night. I never brought it up, never spoke about it. And I remember at the time feeling very strongly like I wasn't supposed to see what I had seen. And if I didn't talk about it, then I hadn't seen it at all.
You see, that's odd now. If it was me, and I'm always looking up at the sky, regardless of what's going on, at times I'd be like, hey, does anybody else see this big ass silent boomerang going over the top of us?
Right. And you'd asked me before if other people had noticed.
Yeah.
And we were probably halfway to the car when it dawned on me that nobody else seemed to notice.
Probably around you. Yeah, because people are in a hurry to get out of there. So they're focused on, hey, is the little one, with us, or did we lose Johnny?
Right.
But perhaps people that were still, the ones taking their time getting out, perhaps they saw it.
Right. So mostly I forgot about it because I didn't talk about it at all. I didn't tell my parents. I didn't mention it to anybody. Until 1992, I was on Cape Cod at the time, and I just happened to be watching Unsolved Mysteries.
Oh, I loved Unsolved Mysteries.
And I went back and looked. It was season 5, episode 1. And Robert Stack, who I loved, He scared the bejesus out of me because he did a report on the Hudson Valley Boomerang UFO sightings. And I remember sitting on the living room couch and just my mouth dropped open and I kept saying out loud, "That's what I saw. Holy crap, that's what I saw." So unbeknownst to me, there were 5,000 reported UFO sightings in the Hudson Valley in the mid to late 80s, the majority of which described the same boomerang-shaped craft that I had seen. So much so that the New York Times ran an article about it in 1984, and collectively they became known as the Hudson Valley Boomerang UFO sightings. The first initial UFO report, according to the article The Black Boomerang UFO of Poughkeepsie on UFOinsight.com, occurred a few minutes before midnight on New Year's Eve in 1982.
That's the year I graduated.
And now everyone can do the math and figure out that I'm a young chicken and you are an older chicken.
On with your story.
I'm continuing. The first sighting went as followed. A retired New York City police officer stepped outside his home to clean up some broken glass. Just as he was about to bend down, a bright array of lights caught his attention from above a nearby tree line. Gradually, a large, V-shaped aircraft about the size of a football field came into view. Slowly and silently, it crept over his house a mere few hundred feet above the ground. Speckled along its edges were red, blue, and green lights, and a bright white light beamed down from its center. He and his son followed the light as it illuminated their yard until eventually the aircraft drifted from view. Now, what I saw didn't have multicolored lights. They were just white. And it didn't have a light beaming down.
That's pretty ominous.
From the center. Yeah. Yeah, I think if there had been a light beaming down, I would have
said something?
Yelled or something.
Perhaps they were at the fair trying to get one of those sausage sandwiches I love so much, trying to bring it up through their tractor beam.
We will get you one this year.
Okay. Carry on.
The following year, an officer with the Yorktown Police Department witnessed a similar aircraft, also hovering quite low. He watched it for a few minutes until it banked, made a 45-degree turn, and quickly sped off into the horizon. He put a call into Stewart Air Force Base in Newburgh to see if one of the C-5 transport planes had been airborne that night. None had. It was soon seen again, this time hovering over a long stretch of New York's Taconic Parkway. Dozens stopped to watch the bizarre phenomenon, backing traffic up for miles. Witnesses said it looked like a giant floating city. Again, a white light was observed beaming down from its center. The silence of the aircraft was unsettling, and the slowness with which it crept, a mere 3 to 5 miles per hour, was quite stunning. There were so many sightings of this particular UFO that, like I said, the New York Times ran an article in their August 25th, 1984 edition. In the article, they claimed officials believed the UFO was a hoax, a mere 5 to 6 pilots flying in tight formation. In their article, they say an officer claims he followed the V-shaped lights to the Stormville airport, where he saw a group of small single-engine planes with their undersides painted black and rigged with bright lights.
That's nowhere near the size of a football field.
No.
There'd be space in between them.
Right.
Wow.
And what I saw was moving so slowly that I think I would have been able to see the space in between them. It was a clear night with tons of stars.
Right.
Yeah. Also, according to the article, a pilot in the area said he followed the lights to the Sky Acres Airport parking lot. He claimed the pilots shouted to each other as they flew ultralights in tight formation, a single light hanging below each plane. But
That's ludicrous.
I know. And there's others that say that it is ludicrous. There were pilots who also saw the UFO who said that these explanations were malarkey, that there was no way ultralight pilots could maintain their positions for that long and at such slow speeds, and they would have been super noisy. On March 17, 1983, Dennis Sant, a government worker and father to 5 children, described a rather extraordinary event that occurred over his house in Brewster, New York, to local police. So this is from the police report. He says, "It was a very large object. The structure of it was very dark gray, metallic, almost girder-type looking. The object seemed to be very silent. The lights were iridescent, bright. They stood out in the sky and 3-dimensional. It looked like a city of lights. It just hung in the sky, all brilliant colors. We followed the object around to the backyard, and at that point, a feeling of fright came upon me. Thoughts started to flood my mind. Thoughts of the craft touching ground. Thoughts of an encounter with an alien being. Thoughts of being abducted. All types of fearful thoughts started to enter into my mind." Just a few miles away, traffic came to a halt on Interstate 84 as several other people watched the massive flying object pass overhead. A week later, Newcastle police officer Andy Sadoff was on routing patrol. He was quoted as saying, "I was working a 4 p.m. to midnight tour and assigned to set up some radar to look for speeding cars, and I looked up into the sky and saw a series of lights. At first, I thought it was a plane. It was quite a distance, quite far away, but it was really quite large. As I recall, there were mostly white lights, but there were green lights also. It was alternating green and white. It approached my vehicle, and it stopped, and it seemed to hover. And I'm looking at this thing, thinking, what is it? I wasn't afraid. I was just amazed. I was in awe of it. I didn't know what it was. The only thing that I recall most is I was amazed that there was no noise. There was no humming. There was no engine. There was no sound. It was absolutely silent."
Amazing.
Seconds later, police received another call. Ed Burns, a senior manager at IBM, was on the Taconic Parkway, 10 miles north of Officer Sadoff. He said, "Out of nowhere, I got a lot of static on the radio. I thought maybe I was on the wrong number, and then I went over to turn the dial again, and that's when I looked up and saw this craft. It was a triangular ship, and the back had to be as large as a football field at least, and there was no noise." Ed pulled over, joining a group of motorists on the side of the road, all watching the strange phenomena. Ed said, quote, "I'm not into astronomy, but what I had witnessed that night was not from this planet." End quote. All of the eyewitness reports from that night indicated that the UFO was moving slowly north across the Hudson Valley. At least 12 other people called in from Newcastle. 20 motorists, in addition to Ed Burns, saw it near Millwood. 10 minutes after that, Yorktown police began getting calls. Yorktown dispatcher Officer William Wolfe Jr. said, "Every line kept going, every single line. Constantly answering the phone, another line would light up. I'd answer the next line, and another one would light up. Got to the point where the county parkway stopped. The officers were out in their cars. It was starting to get really crazy. I tried calling the cars to find out if they saw anything, and the only one that called, Kevin, said that he would stop in."
I'm surprised they didn't try to pass it off as a blimp. I'm really surprised.
I'm not, because I know later on
Right.
that's what they did.
But, normally it's always, oh, it's flares. Oh, it's a blimp.
Yeah.
Oh, it's your imagination. Perhaps it was clouds.
Perhaps. That Kevin he was referring to was Officer Kevin Soravia, who corroborated the event with his own account. He said, "The object was extremely large. I estimated it to be close to 300 to 400 yards wide. We stood out in front facing to the north, and approximately about 5 minutes later, the object began to appear from the northern horizon." Once Soravia arrived back at the station, the two officers, Wolf and Soravia himself, stood side by side outside and continued to watch the UFO. However, the two officers' accounts began to differ dramatically. Officer Soravia described it as approximately 18 lights running in a V formation, approximately 200 to 400 yards wide. I was staring between the lights to see any type of a solid structure, where he, Wolf, may have basically been staring at the lights themselves. Officer Wolf said, "They look like airplanes to me." I said, "Kev, I live near an airport and I see these airplanes every day." So as they were coming over, he said, "Well, you can't hear anything." And I said, "Listen." But then we started to hear a drone. It wasn't one big solid unit. But if you looked at it for like a couple of minutes, or even a fraction as it was coming over, I could see where some people would have gotten upset.
Yeah.
So maybe that's the thing. Maybe there was space in between and I didn't notice. I don't know.
Perhaps so. I don't know how bright the lights would be for the human eye, where it would kind of blur your vision to a point where...
Maybe.
I'm not sure.
Maybe. As to be expected, there were others who agreed with Officer Wolf, most notably Anthony Capaldi, an air traffic control specialist. He claimed the lights were simply several planes flying in tight formation. Other theories were brought forth, including military flares and dirigibles.
Military flares are swamp gases.
But for those others who stood on highways and in backyards, or at county fairs like me, staring up for long minutes at a time, these explanations seemed impossible, and the sightings continued. In June of 1983, in Hopewell Junction, people were celebrating 4th of July a week early, shooting off fireworks. As they set up for their second round, they began hearing a humming sound. Looking up, they could see an arc of bright lights. They reported that the craft was the width of perhaps 16 or 17 houses, and that it literally covered Jefferson Park, and it was silent as it hovered over them for several minutes. The craft began humming again and took off. But here's where the thing gets really creepy, at least for me. Shortly after 9:30 p.m. on August 25th, 1985, Greg Boone, a reporter for the Poughkeepsie Journal, got a call from one of their photographers. She had just left the Dutchess County Fair.
Oh, my God.
And she, along with approximately 200,000 attendees on their way home from the fairgrounds, were witnessing the Boomerang UFO on Route 9. And she said it was heading towards the newspaper office. The photographer had been on a hill above the fairgrounds, taking nighttime photos when she first saw the thing. A slightly rounded craft and a darker shade than the early evening sky, and it was huge. She and her friend watched it for about 10 minutes until it suddenly vanished. It was there, and then it just wasn't.
200,000 people.
Mm-hmm.
That's a lot to witness, you know.
Well, you figure when they say that
in the air and...
when they say that over 5,000 people reported it, it makes sense that 200,000 saw it, but didn't.
And there's a lot of people that just aren't going to come forward.
Yeah. As the fairgoers left the fair, the UFO appeared again, causing many motorists to pull over and just gawk at it. The photographer told Boone that if he looked outside the newspaper office, he would undoubtedly see it. So he grabbed 2 editors and they went immediately to the 3rd floor windows. They saw a low-flying black craft about 5 miles away, flying 100 feet from the ground at an incredibly slow speed. Its underside glowed with amber and red lights. Boone's first concern was how low it was flying over a residential area. As it got closer and passed over the building, the underside lights shut off. Boone heard no sound as the massive craft, he estimated it was 200 feet wide, flew mere feet over the building. And once it cleared the building, it just took off. They had photos. They had witnesses. They had a story.
Yeah.
And they were told not to run it. Allegedly, the newspaper was visited the following day by some menacing chaps.
Oh, no.
Who reiterated that they were not to publish anything about what they'd seen.
The Men in Black.
Supposedly.
I would have just published it anyway.
Yeah. They must have been quite menacing.
I imagine so.
And the last sighting I wanted to mention occurred in November of 1986. I had said earlier there was a sighting over an IBM plant, and it was the East Fishkill IBM plant.
Oh, where your father worked.
Where my dad worked.
Oh.
So we were in Japan during 1986, but I did ask him about it recently when I was researching this story.
Oh, you did?
Yeah, I did. And he said he does remember hearing about it, but not a lot of details. According to the report, it was about 9 p.m., and the second shift workers were returning from lunch. They claimed a huge triangular craft, dark in color, was hovering over the plant, a few 100 feet overhead. It had 4 lights on it, one at each point of the triangle and one in the center, and was estimated to be 1,000 feet long.
1,000 feet. Let me see. That's almost the size of 3 football fields. That's massive.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and I guess if you're looking up for some people, if it's that massive, even the lights, I mean, that blocks out the sky.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, perhaps they would just think the sky's particularly dark in that one area. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. It's no darn dirigible, though.
I've never seen a boomerang aircraft at this point.
No, that was the one and only time that I saw it, something like that. When one of the workers reported the event to the New York State Police, he was asked a dozen questions related to the craft's direction and speed, and then was told it was probably a group of ultralight aircraft. So, here's what I think.
It's their go-to thing.
Yeah. I had forgotten about it pretty much, and it wasn't something I'd ever talked about.
Right.
But when I saw it on Unsolved Mysteries, that just blew my mind, because it immediately came back to me as that was exactly what I had seen. And it doesn't make rational sense to me that it would be a dirigible.
No.
A blimp. Like, it just doesn't make sense.
Not at all.
And I also think it's odd that the Poughkeepsie Journal reporter, I mean, it involved the Dutchess County Fair, the same area.
Yep.
And there was another theory that I didn't mention, but people had suggested that it was the stealth bomber.
No, the stealth bomber isn't that big.
No. And I mean, Stewart Air Force Base was close by.
Right.
So, you know, it would make sense that they would say that it was some sort of military craft.
Right. And the stealth bomber, it finally did come out. Yes, we have the stealth bomber. It was at air shows after where it finally came out. But even though they say our technology is at least 30 to 40 years ahead of what we know for aircraft and things in development, I still find it pretty hard to believe that we had something that massive that could make no sound in the air at that time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I think they were scared to death, and they just need to grasp at any explanation they could.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. But the other thing that freaks me out the most is why we didn't talk about it. Like, why we rode home in complete silence. We didn't talk about anything.
Well, you know, I've never been a real big UFO buff. It just wasn't my forte. But I've heard after numerous shows, you know, that happens with people. That they see things and then just never speak about them.
Yeah.
Now, I don't know because I haven't had that experience with UFO.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the closest thing I came to a UFO was after a long week of being on duty. I was sitting out in my backyard, had my feet kicked up, enjoying a beer. Bonfire was going. And I always peered up at the sky because I love looking at the stars. And of course, over the house, there was always shooting stars. But I saw this one bright light just take off like crazy, just straight up, bright as all hell, straight up. And I couldn't explain that. Mm-hmm. That's the only thing I've seen in the sky that
it was a dirigible.
I couldn't. It was a flare. They're going up these days, not coming down.
Well, I don't know what you wanderers all think about that, but I appreciate sharing my story. And I think that about wraps it up for this episode.
Yeah, and perhaps if any of you out there saw this, comment on our Facebook page.
Yeah,
we'd like to hear about it if any other people have had this experience.
Yeah, hit us up on Facebook.
I'm kind of jealous that I haven't had that one. Well, I think that about wraps it up for this episode. So we'll see all you wanderers next week.
We sure will.
Take care.
Thank you for joining us. We look forward to traveling with you again to the places where our minds wander.
If you like what you heard, please take a moment and provide us with a 5-star rating and a comment. It really helps us move up the list so people can find us. See you next week for an all-new episode of Where Our Minds Wander.